Hey everyone, Dave here with the Philly Tech Podcast, where we feature members from the community and share their subject matter expertise. Today, I am speaking with Tom Connolly, calling in from Wayne, PA. Tom is a proven technologist, a business leader, a serial entrepreneur who has sold 2 startups in IT services to private equity, and has subsequent experience with more than 24 acquisitions and successful company integrations for growth. Tom, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Glad to be talking here.
Awesome. Glad to have you. We talked a little bit about doing things a little bit different. Usually it's a little bit of a kind of a Q&A, but in this case, we're going to go into a bit of a presentation where you're going to talk about selling a business and preparing for an exit, which I thought was it's an interesting topic for a lot of reasons. Firstly, it's something that not a lot of people have experience with. You kind of really have to progress through the journey to get there. But it's also one of the kind of business life events that can be both positive and negative.
Yeah,
Starting
so
business is
true.
always positive, right? Like everyone's always excited about that. Selling could go either way. And so I've sold a few businesses of varying sizes, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say on the matter. That being said, Tom, if you want to share your screen, get into the presentation, and I'll switch to active listener mode.
Sure will. See me okay?
I see you, and I am waiting for, here we go. Got considering an exit, right?
That's it.
Take it away.
All right. So essentially 4 key points I'll make here. Got a slide on each, get clear on your why, understand your expectations for a sale, and then spend a little bit of time on the process, kind of the standard process, and then talk about some other approaches outside of the standard process. Feel free to jump in, Dave, if I'm not clear on anything. So really important to decide if you really want to sell or not. There are a lot of emotional as well as financial considerations, and sometimes selling is a necessity. Sometimes it's what the owners want to do. Other times, it might be something that you really hadn't considered. So open discussion on when and if to sell. In my case, in 2 startups, in both cases, from day one, it was planned to grow it to a certain level and then sell the company. Ideally sell to a private equity and continue after that as part of a larger organization. And in the second, I'll talk mostly about the second company, BizTech. So it was a larger enterprise. We had a little more experience, got a little bit better at the process. So we had a revenue target of $20 million in a 5-year time frame. And lo and behold, 12 years in, still going at it. We'd grown to 8 partners/owners, and we were stuck at about the $15 million range. We'd gotten up to 18. We'd gone back down with the financial crisis in 08 to about 10. And we'd kind of been hovering around 13, 14. Been a longer ride than we planned. And I looked around the group. We discussed openly and decided it was time to move on. So the group was in agreement. In fact, my next point here is technically, if you do have multiple partners, it's a majority, the majority owner or multiple owners can control this decision, most certainly. If you have voting stock or preferred stock, that might be an element in that only a subset of the partners have that control. In our situation, for cultural reasons, and it's a good group, we built the company together. We did a straight up discussion and vote with each partner kind of having an equal voice. In the end, it turned out that it was unanimous. We had all decided that was a good move for us to pursue. Another side note here, and this is something folks don't think about well before the sale. Certainly during the sale, it's part of the process, but managing the share price and equity distribution, if you are going to go down the path, if you're not a sole owner, you're going to take on a partner or multiple partners, thinking about how you price the shares, even before you do an external sale to an external buyer. It's a very sensitive topic, and it's one that affects every transaction throughout the life of the organization. If you bring in a partner and you set a share price, $5 a share, in 2021, a year later, your business may have grown, it may have shrunk, you may be performing better or worse. The share price at that time should be relatively, easy to defend and explain to the prior shareholder and any external auditors, and of course the new shareholder. So you really have to think about how you're going to manage that distribution of equity as you're growing the organization. And then, of course, at the end, whatever the ownership is, that's pretty much how you divide up the proceeds of the transaction. If that makes sense. And that can get a little bit more involved. I've been through a number of valuation formulas and processes. Probably a good topic for another discussion. There are a lot of different ways to value a company. Now, let's get to the biggest factor at the end of the day. The financial considerations, what folks give the most consideration to. Although I don't want to minimize the emotional and other factors. It's kind of cool to be a CEO or owner of a company. And, whether it's a lifestyle company and you're doing all right and you just enjoy it, after the sale, a lot of folks, experience some of that seller's remorse where, wow, I'm not CEO anymore. I'm not a owner of a company and I don't have as much control over my destiny. So while there is some financial benefit to selling a company, it's not the only consideration. Now, just mention a few of the others. When you think about selling a company, the structure of the deal, meaning most specifically, is this a cash deal? Is this a stock purchase or a combination of cash and stock? Is there some payout schedule? Are there earnouts for the first year or 2 years that you have to achieve certain milestones in order to maximize the consideration for the sale? And probably important for most folks, not everybody. If you're looking to sell and retire, then that's fine. But if you're like my team, we were looking to sell to a strongly backed company that had growth considerations for another exciting run at building company to the next level and perhaps being part of another transaction, then the role that you would assume after the sale is probably pretty important as well. So all those factors need to be considered, talked about openly in most cases. My mindset has generally been to maximize the financial consideration by being flexible in the other areas. By that, I mean, if someone's going to give you $1 million and they'd like to pay it out over 3 years, I was like, cool, I'd rather have $2 million paid out over 3 years than $1 million lump sum up front. And that's just kind of time value of money. As long as you're comfortable that the organization buying you is not going to go bankrupt or run out of money, then it generally is a way to help maximize the overall consideration for the sale. So that's a good consideration. Other things like, if your buyer wants you to stick around, guess what? Even if you want to leave on day 2, you don't need to say that. So if they're buying, a lot of times they buy the management team. In our case, that was definitely the situation. We had a young team, really talented group, and I coached the team and said, look, these guys want us. They want the team as much as they want what we've done, the customers and the revenue stream that we provide. So it's definitely useful to think about what the mindset of your buyer is, and to a degree, try to maximize what they're looking for as well as what you're willing to give up or accept. Hey, my last point here is we consider this. It goes along with the minimum acceptable offer. What do you do if you go out there, you think, oh, we're worth $10 million, we're worth $50 million, but you don't find any buyers that are willing to pay that? So we had open discussions about that as well. How to move forward. If that happens, you probably know it fairly early in the process. You start to get a feel for what other firms are willing to pay for your company. And what do? You might learn from that experience and set some goals to say 2 years from now, 3 years from now, here's what we need to do in order to get to a position so we can sell. You might learn from speaking to buyers or advisors what they value, and it may adjust the path that you're on in order to, again, position yourself for sale. In our case, we had a mostly consulting driven practice, meaning revenue upon delivery of services, but we had a small growing recurring revenue business, and we certainly knew that was valuable. It ended up being almost as valuable as our consulting practice, even though the consulting practice was about 5 times larger. So one consideration, we could have said, let's step back, let's focus on growing the recurring revenue further for another year, 2 years, 3 years, and potentially had a larger consideration at the time of sale. Got to weigh that with the pros and cons. 3 years from now, the market may be different. We may not do better. We've been fighting the battle for 12 years. So, we had all those discussions openly, and decided to move forward, had a minimum number. So let's look at my story. As I said, over 12 years, I'd done 4 acquisitions, smaller companies. So I brought on partners with each acquisition, had a partner who bought in as a partner, and one who just kind of sweat equity became a partner. So we had a pretty good group. And with 8 partners, our expectation was always that we would grow to be a $30-40 million practice at that size. But lo and behold, we're a $15 million company. So we had become, like it or not, more of a lifestyle company. We enjoyed what we did. We're good at it. We made good money, not great money. We weren't super growth oriented. And some of us had some stronger career plans. So if we didn't get the number we were looking for, I certainly, as a CEO, and I talked openly about this, said, we're going to push a more aggressive partner growth plan, meaning for this number of partners, we either need to get bigger and more profitable, or we're going to end up reducing the number of partners. Some folks, if you kind of put a number on it, say you manage into a plan, you don't meet those numbers, then you're going to have to give up a partnership or just not be part of future equity distributions. So again, background, clear expectations for the sale. Now let's talk about what the process is. We're teams all in agreement, and you know what your number is, you know what your non-financial targets are. Process pretty typically, I've seen this, dozens, if not hundreds of times play out. Goes essentially like this. Got, I think, 8 or 9 bullet points here. So first, get your story ready, get your numbers ready, because you're going to have to get in the game. So you don't have well-organized financials and well-organized presentation on who you are, what your value parameters are, value drivers, why someone would be interested in your firm. Let's get it all organized. You'll be more effective. The standard process really revolves around getting an advisor. And my first piece of advice would be solicit feedback from multiple advisors. First time I sold a company, I didn't do that. I enlisted my accounting firm to act as advisor. And that was probably a mistake. I don't think we maximized the sale. They're good folks and pretty capable, but they weren't professional M&A advisors. Second go around, I had a very good process where I met with 4 or 5 financial advisors. And it's not just about selecting an advisor. It's as much about learning the process and getting that feedback as to what your value might be and what the value components are, the things to emphasize, how to present your firm, and how to maximize that value. If anyone's curious, there are different ways to structure the fee structure, but the most common one I've seen is a sliding scale, where if you kind of are sold for a low amount, there'll be a rather significant price tag, perhaps 10% of the first $1 million was what I'd seen typically. And then it reduces from there, 8% on the second million, 4% on the third, 4%, 6%, 4%, and then 2% on anything less. And if you're a larger sale, then it kind of averages out to somewhere in that, 3 to 5% overall the total deal. So that's kind of a typical structure, but it's whatever you negotiate with whatever advisor you end up working with. So dig into my story a little bit. Like I said, first company, engaged my own accounting firm, good folks, and it ended up working out pretty well, but probably not the best approach. Second go around here, I said about learning about what your company is worth. I had estimates from different advisors as low as 6 million and as high as 15 million. It's a pretty big range. And to some degree, it was this firm just didn't think we were that valuable. And really, I think that was about their maturity or involvement in our space and not having a clear path to where they knew buyers that would pay a higher amount for our organization. And that was good. I learned more about the organization, our company and value, as well as the type of advisor or the specific advisor I wanted to work with. The ones at the higher end had done more deals in our space. They had tombstones or actual qualifications over the last year where they could say, here are the companies we've sold that are similar to yours. Here are, the deal structure that was put together. So learned a lot there. Interesting. Don't be surprised if some advisors say thanks, but no thanks. I had 2 or 3 that just said, we weren't appropriate for them. Not entirely a criticism of our group as much as the size. So some advisors only work with rather large companies. Some advisors work with really small companies, more like business brokers. And the funny thing here is, unusual, one of the folks that said no thanks ended up introducing us to a PE firm just as a courtesy. They said, hey, introduce you to this firm, MC Partners in Boston. And that group ended up being one of the firms that was involved in making us an offer, and ended up being the firm that we went with. And so in the end, advisor, good guy. I still talk to him from time to time, but he missed out on a pretty nice success fee by saying thanks, but no thanks. But he was true to his practice. We were a little smaller than what he typically worked with, and he just gave us a courtesy introduction. Moral of the story is you got to get in the game. You got to talk to a lot of people. You got to network. You got to get a feel for where you fit best and the type of advisors and buyers that you want to work with. Now, here's my other side note, because while I'm sharing with you the standard process, in the end, we stopped short of executing with a financial advisor. And as kind of a dry run for this, I had also prepared my own presentation offering, and was talking to some potential buyers in my network, and ended up getting 2 buyers involved and very high interest, and decided at kind of the 11th hour, right before signing a contract with an advisor, that we would accept the offer from one of these 2 other potential buyers. So I'll just pause there and say, we didn't follow the next steps, but it doesn't take away from the fact that this is, and we potentially could have made more money. But we had some, I'll say, industry or market conditions that we were concerned about, and going through a full cycle might add another 6 months to the process. And we felt that it was best to move forward with the buyer that we had already identified. That said, here's what you would do next: select that buyer, and you put together your offering, usually a PowerPoint presentation, and almost always, I think pretty much always, a 1-page teaser. And the interesting thing is, we had a beautiful 50-page PowerPoint that went through our history and our operational metrics and financial numbers from several different angles, different business units. It was wonderful. The 1-pager is probably what sold the company. And it usually is. People tend to have a short attention span, pretty quickly if they're interested in your company, and you get a quick sense, they'll get a quick sense of whether we're in the ballpark for what they're looking for. So that's technically what you do. The next step's pretty critical, and probably the biggest reason for having an advisor is the ideal way to sell a company is with multiple buyers. So, and those advisors should have a Rolodex and probably a database of financial buyers, operational buyers, strategic buyers in your space. If they don't, then that's probably not a great fit for you, and not worth the fee, the success fee that they're going to charge. What do? At this point, they send out that teaser to, could easily be 20, 30, 50, 100 potential buyers, and see what kind of interest you have. And that's the key. It's getting more buyers involved. Once you get that interest, you want to schedule your roadshow, just like a real IPO where you go on a roadshow to investors. In this case, you're going to have a very brief window, typically not more than 2 to 4 weeks max, and you'll go share your story. You walk through your presentation, interactive discussion with the buyer. They may have their financial buyer, the operational folks that want to understand your secret sauce, how you do what you do, what your team is like, everything that could be important to buying your organization. It's a very exciting time. One of the things to think about is who should be part of the roadshow. Start with the obvious, the CEO. The financial advisor would be there, helping to coordinate and kind of speak in the lingo of the buyer. But you may, and sometimes that's it. A lot of times, you don't need more than just the CEO and the advisor. But it's pretty typical for the CFO to join if you want to drill into the financials, and if the CEO isn't really strong in financial review and financial discussion. And depending on your organization, if you're a really cool tech company, you might want to have your CTO there talking about how awesome your technology is. If you have a great go-to-market strategy, you might want to have your chief revenue officer or sales officer there. It's all about, creating your product and delivering your services, maybe your COO. So small group, good presentation, keep it tight, ready to handle objections, questions, what have you. Your advisor should coach you through that, do some dry runs. Keep it brief because everybody's got a short attention span. Hit the roadshow 2 to 4 weeks. And now we go ahead and sit back and collect offers and negotiate. And this is the fun part. Hopefully you have multiple buyers interested. And just as you might expect, if you ever sold a house recently, it can be pretty exciting. Kind of a little bit of a auction between the buyers. You may have some follow-up meetings. If they want to understand a little bit more, your advisor can facilitate how to drive the negotiations. But guess what? In my experience, not just my own personal selling of two companies, but in general, the CEO is probably the best person to be driving those negotiations directly with the CEO or the managing partner of the buying organization. So in my opinion, you don't want to entirely rely on your advisor to do that. You want to be part of that process. There are usually non-financial considerations being discussed as well as the financial terms themselves. And yeah, I had a good time. This is part of the process. Did have two solid buyers in the last week. We had a little bit of back and forth between the two buyers, and I'll tell you a genuine interest. You know, our team had genuine interest in both of them. So first of all, hopefully it's genuine. And if it is, then there's nothing wrong with a little bit of, gamesmanship. I must have said many times to one or the other buyer, I really want to join your company. You guys are the ones that I want to be with the most. But that other company is giving me a pretty good offer. It's a little stronger than yours financially. Can you please, sweeten your deal? Guess what? It worked. Over the course of about 3 or 4 days, ended up getting a counter offer. We did also decide which firm we wanted to work with the most for non-financial reasons. And in the end, maybe I could have gotten another $500,000 or $1 million from the other firm, but we felt that was equally important as long as the firms were reasonably similar in terms of financial package. All right, so you select the buyer and execute the LOI. Letter of intent basically says, okay, here it is, July 1st. We're intending to buy your firm for this amount of money with these terms. It's usually not immediate, right? You now have to go through and do due diligence. The LOI may have some terms, a formula that could impact the final price. That was in our case. It was based on revenue and margin. We went through a 2-month due diligence period, and the number actually improved a bit over those 2 months because we had a solid month of July and August. So that was good for us, good for the buyer too, right? Because they're getting something even more valuable. Let's talk about due diligence. I think folks know this is a very detailed review of your financial and operational data. Look at all your contracts, employment agreements, compensation plans, anything the buyer is interested in. They should drive that process, give you a nice list, and your obligation to help them understand your operations. They typically want to meet with key management team members, make sure that those folks are as represented by you in the roadshow. So get a feel for those key employees. Here's an important point that some folks don't recognize. If you're selling to a private organization, not a public company, and there is stock involved as consideration in the deal, so it's not 100% cash, then you have every right to perform due diligence on that organization as much as they do on your organization. Reason being, if they tell you their stock is worth $50 million, $8 a share, we have this many shares, okay, you take their word for it, but you really shouldn't. You should review their books, discuss with them, and then try to understand what their process of valuing the company and valuing that stock is. Because if they're a mature buyer and they've been through acquisitions before and they have equity owners of the company, then they have to have thought through that process and certainly should be able to justify what the value of that stock is. If it's in your consideration as part of the purchase of your company, you have every right to peel back and look under the hood or look at the books in detail. It's a great way to you should understand what you're getting involved with. Key question at this point is, do you share your plans to sell with the employees now, or do you wait until the deal is done? In my case, we felt pretty comfortable, and we did tell the employees, we felt good about the buying organization. It was private equity backed. Our LOI was solid. Our performance was good. But in many cases, you might not want to, because any deal can go sideways, and either party can decide not to move forward with the transaction, in which case, have an employee workforce that's a little bit disheveled and concerned about the long-term plans for the company. So consider that, give that due consideration. And if you're comfortable with it, great. There are some people that you may need to involve in the process because they may need to talk to the buyers, but otherwise it's perfectly fine to wait until the day you sell. And last but not least, draft the purchase agreement. The purchase agreement is the legal document that has all the contractual obligations, liabilities, future liabilities, how those get handled. Of course, the financial terms and any operational terms or considerations as part of the deal. My story, first sale, was all stock pre-IPO buyer, meaning this is a privately held company that PE-backed, plans to go IPO in the near future. It was super risky, but super exciting, big upside if they did go IPO. In hindsight, it was probably riskier than we should have done. I was like 31 years old and full of visions of exciting IPO and 10x increase in valuation. We were very fortunate. We're one of the companies that did go live shortly after Y2K, early 2000s, did go IPO. But advice is that's generally, unless you're, for me, this was my total worth, right? I was a majority owner in a $5 million company, and probably would have been a smarter move to take some cash out of the deal, if not 100%, maybe 70 or 50%, and still get some upside with the stock. And corollary to that, non-financial terms are certainly important as well. That's about it. If you're good on that, everybody just gets together and executes the deal, and you go off and have a nice little party and celebrate your success. So that's the process, fairly standard, repeated over and over again. Can take as little as 3 months, maybe even a little shorter, or more likely it can take 6 months if you go through 6 to 9 months, if you go through a pretty formal process and you're a larger organization with more complexities, more due diligence, more preparation for the roadshow. But those are the steps that help ensure that you're going to have multiple buyers. You're going to get the best buyers at the table that would be a good fit for you, both financially and operationally. All right. Last slide I had was just to highlight a few of the other things that other ways that companies go through an exit. You could, which in the end is, you could run a cycle yourself without an advisor. Benefit being you don't give up 5 to 15% of the consideration. So that's cool. In fact, it was one of the factors that we considered, and ultimately the path that we did with BizTech. So the process is pretty much the same. Just do it yourself. Prepare your own deck, solicit your own buyers, go through the negotiation process yourself. My advice here would be is you still could get some help with your presentation. You could pay the same professional advisors, but pay them on an hourly basis. You might not give up 10% of your company, 10% of your proceeds. If you do that, you might pay someone 50 hours or 100 hours to help you put together a really good presentation. Similarly, you might need help drafting and negotiating the purchasing agreement, but there are good lawyers and M&A attorneys who can do that for you by the hour. Biggest challenge, in my opinion, is that the advisor typically brings a lot more buyers to the table. That's probably the number one reason to go with a professional advisor, is to make sure that you get a good group of buyers. All right. Next option, friendly sale to a partner organization. So a lot of companies don't plan to sell, but in the course of business, you work with other companies, maybe you go to market together. In some cases, maybe you compete, but you're friendly competitors. You win some deals, you lose some deals, and you have respect for the other organization. That organization might approach you one day and say, hey, why don't we join forces? We have some resources. We'd like to buy your organization or merge with you, or you might decide to approach them. So that's a very common way that an exit occurs. Typically doesn't provide maximum financial return. Not always, it could, but it may be ideal if you have a really strong partner who you know is a good fit for your organization. So nothing wrong with this approach. You still could go out there and do a limited cycle to kind of validate your value, and then give that key partner kind of right of first refusal and say, look, I think we're worth $10 million. We'll take 9 because we really like you guys, and let's just lock arms and move forward. All right. The other approach that's fairly common is sell to your partners or your employees. If you're the sole or majority owner and you want to exit strategy for yourself, it's certainly a feel-good option. The other folks that are now getting equity opportunities that maybe didn't have them before are going to feel pretty good about the company. Doesn't typically yield the maximum return, or maybe not in the short term. If this is part of a long-term strategy to transition equity over 5-10 years, it could be a good financial option. But it's oftentimes a good option if you're just looking to sell partial interest, and incent other people to help drive growth and success of the company over the next few years. So that's a common option. The other one that's pretty common is don't sell and keep it in the family, which at the end of the day is still a sale. Whether you hand it to your kids, your heirs, or you set together a financial buyout structure over a period of time, especially if you have multiple kids. Common is everybody gets an equal share, but not always the case. Maybe one of your kids is involved in the business, and the others are not. So my advice here is hire a professional advisor and accountant to help guide the process, and be very sensitive to your family relationships, because usually somebody's not going to be happy with the way it unfolds if you go this route. But it's still a great route, believe me. I have plans in the future to perhaps do another startup, and that would always be a nice way to think about how you transition, have a legacy succession to your kids. All right. Last but not least, call this the fire sale. If you really have to sell and you can't really go through a competitive process, the value isn't something that there's strong enough interest in, you may have to do other things. And as I wrote that down, because it's a real option, I don't have that experience, so I don't have a whole lot of insight. I don't have any insight to share with you here. I've never had to go through a process. I've helped some customers who have been through that process, quasi bankruptcy and recapitalization, and bringing in unfriendly folks to give you as much money as you can get and sell off some of your assets. Maybe the company survives, maybe it doesn't. So we'll just say that that's not necessarily the best thing. I will share one story, my last story here, which is not a great story, but has a happy ending. My dad was an entrepreneur before me, and he built up a nice, successful consulting business, over 20 employees. And he was a sole owner. He didn't sell equity. He had no plans to sell the company or share equity. I was rather young. I was in my early 20s, and perhaps he would plan to, pass it on to myself and my siblings, which would have been awesome. But he developed some health issues, and he couldn't keep the company going. So you took a pretty successful company, and it went down to essentially slowly decline down to zero revenue, and they kind of closed their doors. So that was sad, because you always want to, as they say, sell high and buy low. So he missed the opportunity to sell at all. The happy ending is that a couple of years later, I was ready to start something. I'd always planned to get into an entrepreneurial startup, and it worked out well that his company, they just closed their doors. So I was able to work with my dad. We basically kept the company name. We kept a lot of the history in terms of we were an established company. So we had credit relationships. We had some customer references, and used that to start a practice. And that, with that intent, because of my dad's situation, built that up with 3 other partners I brought on board, and we sold it 4 years later. And my dad retained 30% ownership in the company, so he got some money for his retirement, and we made some money, and we had a good experience. So that's it. That's all I got, Dave. That's been some of my experiences. I hope that's helpful. Or if anyone has questions or wants to reach out and talk about this any further, I'd be happy to share further insight.
For sure, Tom. Yeah, I really appreciate this. Nice mix of just kind of educational value intertwined with like personal experiences that, are very unique, and appreciate that you really kind of shared, we'll call it sensitive details, some specifics around the number of the partners, some of the figures that you're considering, real good stuff that's just kind of hard to come across. So definitely relate to this to a degree in some of my earlier endeavors. Sold a business, and then you talk about that seller's remorse aspect of like, okay, but now what? Now you have maybe no company, no team, no cash flow coming in. Not to say that you're with nothing, but those are things to consider. And it's just, what I learned is that how important it really is to plan for these types of things. So much planning goes into starting the business and the journey, but a lot of times we overlook the sale, and that's in some way, I hate to say the most important thing, but it's you're missing like a big opportunity if you don't take time to think about it. And the planning really starts like a year or more out, because in the way that you might approach that year for growth, you might cut back on certain expenses, things that are on your 5-year plan. All those things you might kind of scale down to make the numbers look better for the potential sale. Those are all things that we kind of overlooked. So I think this is great stuff here, Tom.
Very true.
people
Awesome.
that want to get in touch with you, how should they find you?
Sure. Email. I'm in the group, so you can reach out through Slack. The email's tconnolly at tiptop-us.com.
Awesome.
And I'm on LinkedIn. So Tom Connolly, Philly boy myself.
Cheers. Okay. Thanks again, Tom, for putting this together, making it the easiest podcast I've ever done because all I had to do was just listen to some content. If and anyone would like to get in touch with Tom, he's in our Slack group. So thanks again.
Awesome.